The morning Caroline Harper stepped onto the auction block in Dodge City, Kansas. She promised herself she would not cry in front of these men who eyed her like cattle. It was August 1878, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street where a crowd had gathered outside the Silver Star Saloon. Her brother Tommy had gambled away more than he owned, had signed papers he should never have touched, and when he could not pay the $5,000 he owed to Jack Mercer, the most ruthless loan shark between here and Abilene, he had fled town like the coward he was. That left Caroline, 22 years old and alone in the world since their parents died of fever 2 winters past, to face the consequences of his stupidity. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Caroline Harper," announced Mercer, a rat-faced man with slicked-back hair and a smile that made her skin crawl. "Educated, can read and write, plays piano, and as you can see, easy on the eyes. Bidding starts at $1,000. Caroline stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her worn calico dress. She had pinned her dark hair back severely, hoping to look plain, but she knew it made no difference. These men did not care about her dignity. She scanned the crowd, seeing miners with gold dust still on their clothes, merchants with calculating eyes, and ranch hands who had likely pooled their wages for a chance at owning a woman. The very thought made bile rise in her throat. 1,000, called out a portly man she recognized as the owner of the dry goods store. 1,200, countered a tall miner with a thick beard. The bids climbed steadily. 1,500, 2,000. Caroline felt each number like a blow. She focused on a point above the crowd's heads, trying to separate her mind from her body, from this moment that would define the rest of her life. Then she heard a voice, deep and steady, cutting through the others like a knife through butter. $5,000. The crowd fell silent. Every head turned toward the back where a man stood beside a black horse. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty traveling clothes and a weathered Stetson that shadowed his face. He stepped forward slowly, and Caroline could finally see him clearly. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin, strong features, and eyes the color of a summer storm. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, that made him different from every other man there. "That is the full amount of the debt," Mercer said, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You sure you got that kind of money, stranger?" The cowboy reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. He walked forward and dropped it on the makeshift podium with a heavy thunk. Gold coins spilled out, glinting in the sunlight. "Count it." Mercer did, his fingers moving quickly through the coins. His expression soured when he finished. "It is all here." He clearly had hoped to make more from this spectacle. "Then we are done," the cowboy said. He looked up at Caroline for the first time, and their eyes met. Something passed between them in that moment, something she could not name but felt deep in her chest. "Miss Harper, would you come down from there, please?" His politeness in this degrading situation almost undid her composure. Caroline descended the steps on shaking legs. The cowboy offered his hand to steady her on the last step, and she took it. His palm was calloused, but his grip was gentle. "Hold on now," Mercer said, stepping forward. "She is your property now, bought and paid for. But I want a bill of sale signed proper." "I do not need a bill of sale for something I am not keeping," the cowboy replied calmly. Everyone stared at him. Caroline felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you mean?" she whispered. He turned to her, and she saw kindness in those gray eyes. "I mean you are free, Miss Harper. You do not owe me anything. You do not owe anyone anything. Your brother's debt is paid, and you can go wherever you want." She could not process his words. They made no sense. "But you just paid $5,000. "Yes, ma'am, I did." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, as if considering his answer carefully. "Because nobody should be bought or sold, because you looked like you needed help, and because I could," Mercer sputtered in outrage. "Now wait just a minute. You cannot just set her free. That is throwing away good money." The cowboy's expression hardened as he looked at Mercer. "It is my money to throw away. The debt is settled. You have no more claim on Miss Harper or her brother. If I hear you have gone after either of them again, you will answer to me. Are we clear?" Something in his tone made Mercer step back. The loan shark nodded grudgingly, stuffing the gold into his own bag. "Clear enough, but you are a fool, Cowboy. I have been called worse." He turned back to Caroline. "Do you have belongings you need to collect?" She nodded mutely. "At the boarding house, one trunk." "I will take you there," he gestured to his horse. "This is Cisco, he is gentle." Caroline found her voice, though it trembled. "I do not even know your name." A small smile touched his lips. "James Cordell, most people call me Jim." "Mr. Cordell, I do not understand why you did this, but thank you." The words seemed pitifully inadequate for what he had just done. "Just Jim is fine, Miss Harper, and you are welcome." The crowd had begun to disperse, disappointed that the spectacle had ended so anticlimactically. Jim led Cisco down the street with Caroline walking beside him. She was intensely aware of his presence, of how he positioned himself between her and the remaining onlookers, as if still protecting her even though the auction was over. "Where will you go?" he asked as they walked. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have nowhere. Tommy and I came here from Missouri 3 years ago. He worked at the stockyards until he started gambling. I took in sewing and laundry. When he ran off, the landlady threw me out because I could not pay the rent." "What about your folks?" "Dead. It has just been Tommy and me since I was 19. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure badly in need of paint. The landlady, Mrs. Pettigrew, met them at the door with Caroline's trunk already sitting on the porch. She had clearly heard about the auction. "I want no trouble here," Mrs. Pettigrew said sharply. "There will not be any," Jim replied evenly. He lifted the trunk easily and secured it to Cisco's saddle, then he looked at Caroline. "I have a proposition for you if you want to hear it." She tensed. Here it comes, she thought, the real reason he bought her. The price she would have to pay after all. He must have seen the fear in her eyes because he quickly added, "Not that kind of proposition. A job offer. Honest work for honest pay." "What kind of work?" "I own a ranch about 15 miles from here, near the Arkansas River, the running sea. It is not huge, but it is doing well enough. My mother lives with me, and she has been after me for months to find someone to help with the house. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. She is getting older and the work is hard on her. If you want the position, it is yours. You would have your own room, 3 meals a day, and $30 a month." Caroline stared at him. $30 was more than generous for housework. "Why would you offer me this after what you just spent?" Jim adjusted his hat, looking almost embarrassed. "Honestly, I do not like seeing people trapped. My father died when I was 16, and some men tried to take our ranch because my mother could not defend it alone. A stranger helped us when he did not have to. I guess I learned from that." He met her eyes. "But I am also telling the truth about needing help at the ranch. My mother really has been asking. This is not charity, Miss Harper. If you take the job, you will work for your pay." She believed him. She could not say why exactly, but she did. Maybe it was the straightforward way he spoke, or the fact that he had not tried to touch her beyond that one steadying hand, or simply that she had no other options. But more than that, she wanted to believe that not all men were like her brother or Jack Mercer, that some could be decent and kind. "I will take the job," she said. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his serious face. "Good. We should head out soon if we want to make it before dark. Are you all right to ride? Cisco can carry us both." The thought of sitting so close to him for 15 miles made her nervous, but she nodded. Jim mounted first, then reached down and pulled her up behind him with easy strength. Caroline settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware that she had to put her arms around Jim's waist to stay steady. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt. "Hold on," he said, and clicked his tongue. Cisco started forward at an easy walk. They rode out of Dodge City heading southwest. The landscape opened up into rolling prairie, golden grass rippling in the wind beneath an endless blue sky. Caroline had been so consumed by worry and fear for the past weeks that she had forgotten how beautiful Kansas could be. The rhythmic movement of the horse, the warmth of the sun, and the simple fact that she was safe began to unknot the tension in her shoulders. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a while, wanting to break the silence. "Started it 6 years ago with money my father left us," Jim replied. "We run about 200 head of cattle now, plus horses. I have 3 men who work for me. Good men. They live in the bunkhouse but take meals at the main house. My mother does the cooking now, but it is getting to be too much for her, especially during roundup when everyone is working dawn to dusk." "What is your mother like?" Strong, stubborn, kind-hearted under all her tough talk. There was affection in his voice. "Her name is Ruth. She will probably interrogate you thoroughly, but do not let that scare you. She means well." "I am not afraid of hard work or questions," Caroline said. "I am just grateful for the chance." They rode on, following the Arkansas River as it wound through the land. Jim pointed out landmarks, told her about the neighbors, and explained how the ranch operated. He had an easy way of talking that made her feel comfortable, never pressing when she went quiet, never demanding more than she wanted to share. As the afternoon wore on, Caroline found herself studying the back of his head, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the breadth of his shoulders. She wondered again why he had really done what he did. $5,000 was a fortune. He could have bought breeding stock or land or any number of things that would have improved his ranch. Instead, he had spent it on a stranger and expected nothing in return. It did not make sense, and yet here she was, riding toward a new life because of his inexplicable generosity. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured. "Sure. That money you spent today, was it all your savings?" He was quiet for a moment. "Most of it." Her stomach dropped. "Jim, I cannot let you do this. That was everything you worked for. It was mine to spend how I wanted. And I wanted to help you. But why?" Her voice rose with emotion. "You did not know me. You had never even seen me before today." Jim pulled Cisco to a stop and turned in the saddle so he could see her face. His expression was serious. 5 years ago, I was in Ellsworth selling cattle. I saw a man beat his wife in the street because dinner was not ready when he wanted it. She was maybe 90 pounds, and he knocked her down and kicked her while people just watched. I pulled him off her and he came at me with a knife. I defended myself and he died from his injuries." He paused, his jaw tight. "The law cleared me, said it was self-defense, but that woman thanked me with tears running down her face and said I was the first person who had ever stood up for her. That stuck with me. So when I rode into Dodge City this morning and heard about an auction, heard them talking about Tommy Harper's sister being sold like livestock, I could not stand by again. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I am going to regret losing that money when winter comes hard, but I will not regret helping you." Caroline felt tears burning in her eyes, the ones she had refused to shed at the auction. "You are a good man, Jim Cordell." "I try to be." He turned back around. "We are almost there." They crested a low hill and Caroline saw the ranch spread out below them. The house was built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray with a wide porch and a stone chimney. There was a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals holding horses and cattle grazing on the hills beyond. Cottonwood trees lined what must be a creek. It was modest but well-maintained, a place someone clearly cared about. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She was in her 50s, Caroline guessed, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a bun and a sturdy build. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and her face showed both curiosity and caution as Jim and Caroline dismounted. "Ma, this is Caroline Harper," Jim said. "I have offered her the housekeeping position we discussed. Caroline, this is my mother, Ruth Cordell." Ruth looked Caroline over with sharp brown eyes. "Where did you find her?" "Dodge City." "That tells me nothing." Jim glanced at Caroline. "She was in a difficult situation. I helped her out of it and now she needs work. I figured we could help each other." Ruth was no fool. Caroline could see the older woman putting pieces together. "What kind of difficult situation?" Caroline lifted her chin. "My brother gambled money he did not have and ran off. The man he owed was going to make me pay the debt. Mr. Cordell paid it instead and offered me honest work. That is the truth, Mrs. Cordell, and if you do not want me here because of it, I understand. There was a long silence. Then Ruth smiled. Any woman who can state her troubles that plainly has spine. We can use someone with spine around here. Come inside, Miss Harper. You look like you have not eaten properly in days. The kindness in those words nearly broke Caroline's composure. Ruth noticed and put a hand on her shoulder. You are safe here, girl. Come on. Inside, the house was clean and simply furnished. There was a large kitchen with an iron stove, a sitting room with comfortable chairs, and upstairs 4 bedrooms. Ruth showed Caroline to a small room at the back that overlooked the creek. It is not fancy, but it is yours, Ruth said. Jim will bring up your trunk. Wash up and come down when you are ready. Supper will be in an hour. When she was alone, Caroline sat on the bed and finally let herself cry, not from sadness or fear, but from relief so profound it hurt. She had been so certain her life was over, that she would become some man's possession, worked and used until she was old or dead. Instead, she was here in this quiet room with a job and her freedom. Because of Jim Cordell, who had asked nothing from her except her labor, which she was more than willing to give, she washed her face in the basin, changed into her other dress, which was only slightly less worn, and went downstairs. Voices came from the kitchen. She paused in the doorway and saw Jim talking with 3 other men, ranch hands by the look of them. They all looked up when she entered. Boys, this is Miss Harper, Jim said. She is going to be helping my mother with the house. Caroline, this is Pete, Hank, and Miguel. Pete was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Hank was younger and stocky, with red hair and freckles. Miguel was probably close to Jim's age, lean and dark-haired with an easy smile. Pleased to meet you, Miss Harper, Pete said, and the others echoed the sentiment. Call me Caroline, she said. I am not used to formality. Caroline it is, Miguel said with a grin. Just so you know, we are all hoping your cooking is better than Ruth's. No offense, Ruth. Plenty taken, Ruth replied, but she was smiling as she swatted him with a towel. My cooking has kept all of you alive this long. Barely, Hank muttered, then yelped when Ruth swatted him too. The easy banter made Caroline smile, really smile, for the first time in longer than she could remember. These people had known each other for years, clearly, and the affection between them was genuine. She hoped she could find a place among them. Supper was beef stew with biscuits, simple but filling. Caroline ate slowly, listening to the conversation flow around her. They talked about the cattle, about a fence that needed mending, about whether they should buy more horses in the fall. Jim included her when he could, asking about her preferences for the household, what hours she wanted to keep, whether she needed anything from town. I will need fabric and thread if I am going to mend anything, she said. And I noticed the curtains in the sitting room are thin. I could make new ones if you like. You sew? Ruth asked with interest. Yes, ma'am, I took in sewing in Dodge City. I am fairly good at it. Well, we have plenty that needs mending around here. The boys are hard on their clothes. After supper, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse and Ruth went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. That left Jim and Caroline alone in the kitchen as she washed dishes and he dried them. It felt strangely domestic, standing side by side like this. Your mother is wonderful, Caroline said. She likes you, I can tell. How? She did not interrogate you as much as I expected. He smiled. And she usually does not warm to people quickly. The fact that she showed you the bedroom without making you sleep in the barn first is a good sign. Caroline laughed. Would she really have made me sleep in the barn? Probably not. But there was a hired man once who she did not trust. He slept in the barn for a week before she let him in the bunkhouse. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Caroline was aware of Jim's nearness, of the way his arm occasionally brushed hers as they worked. She caught herself glancing at his profile, at the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Stop it, she told herself firmly. He rescued you. He gave you a job. Do not repay his kindness by developing inappropriate feelings. But her heart did not seem to be listening to her head. "Thank you again," she said quietly, "for everything." Jim set down the plate he was drying and looked at her. "You have already thanked me. You do not need to keep doing it." "I feel like I do. What you did today, Jim, it was extraordinary." "It was right," he corrected gently. "There is a difference." She wanted to say more, to tell him that most people did not do what was right when it cost them so much, but the intensity in his eyes made her look away. There was something there, some feeling she did not dare name yet. It was too soon. She had known him for less than a day, but part of her, the part that believed in fate and destiny and love at first sight from the novels she used to read, wondered if maybe time did not matter when you met the right person. The days turned into weeks and Caroline settled into life at the Running Sea Ranch. She woke early, helped Ruth prepare breakfast for the men, cleaned the house, did laundry, mended clothes, and cooked supper. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Dodge City never had been. Here she felt useful, appreciated. Ruth taught her to make bread the way Jim liked it, how to cook for hungry ranch hands who needed substantial meals, which herbs from the garden to use for what ailments. The older woman had taken her under her wing, treating her like the daughter she had never had. They worked side by side, talking about everything and nothing, and Caroline felt the lonely ache inside her begin to heal. The ranch hands treated her with respect and friendliness. Pete told her stories about the old days when this whole territory was wild and unsettled. Hank made her laugh with his terrible jokes. Miguel taught her Spanish words and flirted harmlessly, though they both knew there was nothing serious in it. And then there was Jim. She saw him every day, of course, at breakfast, at supper, sometimes during the day when he came to the house for something. They talked easily now about books they had read, places they had been, dreams they had for the future. He had a thoughtful way of listening, of really hearing what she said, that made her feel valued. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and wondering. She tried not to think too much about her growing feelings for him. It seemed ungrateful somehow, as if she were taking advantage of his kindness. He had saved her, given her a home and work, and now she was falling in love with him like some foolish girl in a story. Surely he would be appalled if he knew. But it was hard to ignore her heart when it raced every time he smiled at her, when her skin tingled if he accidentally touched her hand, when she found herself looking for excuses to be near him. One evening in early October, about 6 weeks after she had arrived, Caroline was on the porch mending one of Pete's shirts when Jim rode up on Cisco. He had been checking the herds and was dusty from the trail. He dismounted and started to lead the horse to the barn, then stopped and looked at her. "Want to go for a ride?" he asked. She set down her sewing. "Now, the sunset is going to be beautiful tonight. I thought you might like to see it from up on the bluff." Her pulse quickened. "I would like that." He saddled a gentle mare named Daisy for her, and they rode out together. Caroline had learned to ride properly in the weeks she had been here, and she kept pace with Jim as they headed toward higher ground. The sky was already beginning to turn colors, gold and pink and orange bleeding across the horizon. They reached the bluff and dismounted. From here they could see for miles, the prairie stretching endlessly, the river winding like a silver ribbon, the ranch buildings small in the distance. The wind was cool and smelled of grass and earth and the coming autumn. "It is beautiful," Caroline breathed. "I come up here when I need to think," Jim said. He stood beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "It puts things in perspective." "What do you need perspective on?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You." Her heart stopped. "Me." Jim turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Caroline, I know the circumstances of how we met were unusual. I know you might feel obligated to me because of what I did. But I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not make things awkward between us." "What is it?" She could barely get the words out. "I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than is wise, given that you work for me and live in my house, and I do not want you to feel trapped or pressured." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. I am saying this all wrong. What I mean is, over these past weeks I have gotten to know you. Your strength, your kindness, your humor, the way you sing when you think no one is listening, and I have fallen for you, Caroline, completely. Joy and fear warred in her chest. Jim, you do not have to say anything, he continued quickly. I just wanted you to know. If you do not feel the same way, nothing has to change. You still have your job and your room and my respect, but if there is any chance you might feel the same, I would like to court you properly. Take things slow, see where they lead. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, but these were happy tears. You think you are the only one who has been feeling this way. Jim, I have been half in love with you since the day you bought me just to set me free. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more. I thought I was being foolish, that I was reading too much into your kindness, but if you are saying you care for me too. She did not get to finish because Jim had closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. Yes, she whispered. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Caroline had been kissed before, clumsy attempts by boys back in Missouri that had meant nothing. This was different. This was everything. She felt it down to her toes, this rightness, this sense of coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Jim rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for weeks. So have I, she admitted. They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set around them, painting the world in shades of fire and gold. Caroline felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening. After everything she had been through, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, she had found him. What happens now? She asked. Now I court you, Jim said with a smile. I take you on picnics and rides, I bring you flowers, I bore you with talk about cattle and horses. I do everything properly so that when I ask you to marry me you will say yes. Her heart soared. When you ask, not if. I am an optimist. He kissed her again, light and sweet. Unless you have objections to eventually becoming Mrs. Cordell? None whatsoever, she said, smiling against his lips. They rode back to the ranch holding hands, which made controlling the horses more difficult, but neither of them cared. Ruth took one look at them when they came in and smiled knowingly. About time, was all she said. The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Caroline's life. Jim took her on rides to see different parts of the ranch, packed picnic lunches that they ate by the creek, brought her wildflowers he picked on his way back from checking the herds. They talked for hours about everything under the sun. He told her about growing up here, about his father who had taught him to be honest and hardworking, about his dreams of expanding the ranch and maybe one day buying the neighboring property. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had loved each other deeply, about Tommy who had been sweet and fun before gambling got its hooks in him. She even told him about the guilt she felt, wondering if there had been something she could have done to save her brother from himself. You cannot save someone who does not want to be saved, Jim said gently. Believe me, I have tried. There was a ranch hand a few years back, good worker when he was sober, but he loved whiskey more than anything. I tried to help him, gave him second chances, third chances, but in the end he had to want to change and he did not. Last I heard, he drank himself to death in Wichita. Some people are just broken in ways we cannot fix. Do you think Tommy is like that? I do not know your brother, but I do know that what he did, leaving you to face his consequences, that was unforgivable. You do not owe him your guilt or your worry. It helped to hear that, to have someone validate her anger alongside her sadness. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder. The ranch prepared for winter, moving cattle to protected pastures, stockpiling hay, making sure all the buildings were sound. Caroline spent long days helping Ruth preserve food, making sure they would have enough to last until spring. In the evenings, she sat with Jim in front of the fire, sometimes reading aloud while he repaired tack or went over the ranch accounts, sometimes just talking quietly while the wind howled outside. It was a life she could have never imagined for herself, and yet it felt more real and right than anything before. One night in late November, after everyone else had gone to bed, Jim asked Caroline to stay in the sitting room with him. Snow was falling outside, the first real snow of the season, and the fire crackled warmly. He seemed nervous, which was unlike him. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, nothing is wrong." He took her hands in his. "Caroline, I know we have only been courting for 2 months. I know some people would say that is not long enough to make a decision like this, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not elaborate or expensive, but it was beautiful. Caroline felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Jim slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he murmured against her hair. "You saved my life, Jim Cordell. In every way a person can be saved, I love you so much." They told Ruth the next morning, and she cried and hugged them both and immediately started planning the wedding. They decided on a small ceremony at the ranch in mid-December, just family and the ranch hands and a few neighbors. Caroline wished her parents could be there to see her marry such a good man, but she felt certain they would have approved. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Ruth and Caroline made a wedding dress from cream-colored silk that Ruth had been saving for years. Miguel and Hank built an arch out of branches for the ceremony. Pete offered to give Caroline away since she had no family to do it. The kindness of these people who had become her family moved her to tears more than once. Jim found moments to steal her away, to kiss her in the barn or the pantry or anywhere they could grab a few minutes alone. The desire between them grew stronger, but they had agreed to wait until their wedding night. It was both torture and sweet anticipation. Finally, December 15th arrived, cold and clear. The circuit preacher had come through a few days early and agreed to stay for the wedding. Neighbors from surrounding ranches arrived bundled in their winter clothes. Caroline dressed in her beautiful gown, her dark hair pinned up with small flowers Ruth had dried from the summer garden. When she walked across the yard to where Jim waited under the arch, she saw his eyes go wide with wonder. He looked handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. He looked at her like she was everything. The ceremony was short and simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Jim he could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made everyone smile. The celebration afterward was lively despite the cold. Ruth had cooked a feast with Caroline's help in the days before. There was music from a neighbor who played fiddle and dancing in the barn where they had set up for the party. Jim held Caroline close as they danced, his hand warm on her back. "Hello, Mrs. Cordell," he murmured. She smiled up at him. "I like the sound of that, so do I." When the party finally ended and the guests departed, Jim carried Caroline over the threshold of the house. Ruth had tactfully already gone to bed. Jim carried his bride up the stairs to his room, which was now their room, and set her down gently. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," she admitted, "but I trust you." "I will be gentle," he promised. "We will go slow." He was true to his word. He undressed her carefully, reverently, as if she were precious. He took his time exploring her body, learning what made her sigh and what made her gasp. When he finally made her his wife in full, there was some pain but also pleasure and the overwhelming feeling of rightness. They belonged to each other now, completely. Afterward they lay tangled together under the quilts, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I love you," Caroline whispered. "I love you too," Jim replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," he said and kissed the top of her head. Winter passed quietly, a season of domesticity and deep contentment. Caroline loved being Jim's wife, loved the intimacy of sharing a bed and a life with him. She loved waking up beside him, loved the way he would pull her close in the mornings before they had to rise. She loved sitting beside him at meals, their legs touching under the table. She loved every small moment that made up their daily life together. Ruth was pleased to have help with the house, but also gave them space to be newlyweds. The ranch hands treated Caroline with the same respect as always, but now with the added warmth of knowing she was truly one of them, permanently part of the running C family. In February, Caroline began to suspect she might be pregnant. By March, when her courses had not come for 2 months and she was sick every morning, she was certain. She told Ruth first, who hugged her and cried happy tears. Then that night after supper, she took Jim aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. He looked concerned. "What is it?" "We are going to have a baby." Jim stared at her for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "Really? We are really going to have a baby, really," she confirmed, laughing. "In October, I think." He set her down and cupped her face in his hands. "You have given me everything, Caroline, everything I did not even know I wanted. I love you so much. I love you too." The pregnancy was easier than Caroline had feared. She was sick in the early months, but it passed. Ruth fussed over her, making sure she did not work too hard, that she ate enough, that she rested. Jim was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, treating her like she might break if he touched her wrong. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him with amusement. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. You are carrying our child. And our child is going to have a wonderful father," she said, kissing him. "Stop worrying so much." As summer turned to fall, Caroline's belly grew. She felt the baby move for the first time in July, a flutter like butterfly wings. Jim was amazed when he could finally feel it too, his large hand splayed across her stomach, his eyes full of wonder. "That is our baby," he kept saying. "Our baby." In late October, just a year and 2 months after Jim had first seen Caroline on that auction block, the baby came. The labor was long and painful, attended by Ruth and a midwife from a neighboring ranch. Jim paced downstairs, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Caroline's pain and his inability to help. But when he was finally allowed upstairs and saw Caroline propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle, he felt his heart expand beyond what he thought possible. "It is a boy," Caroline said softly. "We have a son." Jim sat beside her carefully, looking down at the baby's tiny face, the dark fuzz of hair, the miniature fingers that curled around his thumb. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names but never decided firmly. Now, looking at his son, Jim knew. "What about Samuel, after my father?" Caroline smiled. "Samuel Cordell, I like it." She looked down at the baby. "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, but still a baby with all that entailed. Caroline was tired all the time from the night feedings, but she had never been happier. Watching Jim with their son, seeing the gentleness with which he held the tiny boy, the love in his eyes, made her fall even more deeply in love with her husband. Ruth was a doting grandmother, always ready to hold the baby so Caroline could rest, full of advice and help. The ranch hands were charmed by little Samuel, taking turns holding him and making faces to try to get him to smile. Life settled into a new rhythm. Jim worked the ranch, Caroline cared for Samuel and helped with the house as much as she could, and they built their life together day by day. There were hard times, of course. A drought one summer that killed some of their cattle. A winter so brutal they lost part of the herd to cold. A scare when Samuel was 2 and developed a fever that lasted 3 days before breaking, but through it all, they had each other. Jim was her rock, steady and strong and loving. And Caroline, who had once been sold on an auction block-like property, had become the heart of the running C ranch, beloved by everyone who knew her. 3 years after Samuel was born, Caroline gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. Then 2 years after that, another boy they called Daniel. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of life abundant. Jim expanded the ranch, buying the neighboring property just as he had dreamed. The running sea prospered under his management and Caroline's careful household oversight. They built a new, larger house to accommodate their growing family, but kept the old one for memory's sake. Ruth lived to see all 3 of her grandchildren grow into young childhood before passing peacefully in her sleep one winter night. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch she had helped build, and Caroline made sure the children always knew stories about the grandmother who had welcomed her with such kindness. The years passed in the way they do, full of joy and sorrow, triumph and trial, but always underlaid with love. Caroline never forgot where she had come from, never forgot the terror of that day in Dodge City. But she also never forgot the cowboy who had ridden up and changed her life with a simple act of decency. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jim took Caroline back up to the bluff where he had first told her he loved her. Their children were being watched by Pete, who was retired now but still living in the bunkhouse, and they had a rare evening alone. The sunset was just as beautiful as it had been that first night, all gold and crimson and purple. Jim pulled Caroline into his arms and she leaned back against his chest, his hands folded over hers where they rested on her still flat stomach. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Spending all that money on me?" "Never," he said firmly. "Not for 1 second. That was the best investment I ever made." "I was not an investment." "No, you were not. You were a miracle." He turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "I got to marry my best friend. I got the love of my life. I got 3 beautiful children and a home full of laughter. All because I happened to ride into Dodge City that day and found a woman who needed help. If that is not a miracle, I do not know what is." Caroline reached up and touched his face, this man she loved more than her own life. "You saved me, Jim. And you saved me right back," he replied. "I was just going through the motions before you came along, working the ranch, taking care of my mother, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly be alive, to love and be loved, to build something that matters." They kissed as the sun set behind them, surrounded by the land they had built their life on, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many people search for their whole lives and never find: true love, real partnership, a home. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on the porch of the ranch house watching their grandchildren play, Caroline would sometimes think back to that August day in 1878. How terrified she had been, how certain her life was over. She would look at Jim, still handsome despite his years, still the man who had seen her in her darkest moment and chosen compassion over indifference. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask, because even after all those years together, he could still read her like a book. "About how lucky I am," she would say, and he would take her hand, weathered now but still strong, and reply, "I am the lucky one." Their children grew and had families of their own. Samuel took over running the ranch with Daniel working alongside him. Grace married a banker from Dodge City and gave them 4 grandchildren who visited every summer. The Running Sea Ranch became known throughout Kansas as one of the best-run operations in the territory, but also as a place of kindness and second chances. Jim and Caroline never did hear from Tommy Harper again. Sometimes Caroline wondered what had happened to her brother, if he was alive or dead, if he had ever gotten control of his demons. But mostly, she just felt grateful that his mistakes, as painful as they had been, had led her to Jim. That out of something dark and terrible, something beautiful had grown. They died within months of each other, the way couples who have been together for a lifetime sometimes do. Jim went first, peacefully in his sleep at 81, and Caroline followed him just 3 months later. They were buried side by side on the hill next to Ruth, overlooking the ranch they had built together from love and hard work and unwavering dedication to each other. On Caroline's headstone, along with her name and dates, Jim's children had inscribed a line that captured the essence of their mother's story and the love that had defined her life. She was bought for a debt but given freedom, and in return, she gave love without measure. And on Jim's, they wrote simply, "He saw someone in need and chose compassion. In doing so, he found everything." The Running Sea Ranch continued through the generations, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other truly and well. The story of how Jim and Caroline met became family legend, told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the greatest joys, and that choosing kindness over indifference can change not just one life, but generations to come. Their love story, born in the dust and desperation of a frontier town, grew into something that outlasted them both. It lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still bore Jim's brand, in the values they had instilled in their children about decency and compassion, and standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when this life ends, Jim and Caroline were together still, riding across endless prairies under boundless skies, holding hands as the sun set in shades of gold, their love eternal and unbreakable as it had always been.